to do more garden than you have space for, that's always a possibility. I'm on that committee also. So, and I think it's $20 for the plot, and you get compost in your bed, and it's fenced in. Yep. And there's, some basic tools there if you need them. And so we'll be accepting registrations for that soon. And we will have on May 16th an orientation too. So you'll be hearing more about that, on what we expect people to do as part of the community garden. So, okay, we're going to go on here. Here's some reasons why people probably plant gardens. It's the freshest food you can probably get. Shipping and storage time means the vegetables you buy in the store are probably a week old or maybe older. So if you want really fresh vegetables, you can grow them and pick your own. Same thing with flowers. The freshest flowers, of course, are the ones that you grow in your garden and pick and bring inside for bouquets. There's varieties you can't find in the store, especially if you're vegetable gardening. You go to a garden center and they maybe have a dozen different kinds of tomatoes. If you grow your own, you can choose from hundreds of different or thousands of different varieties. And so that's very, very much opens the possibilities for different kinds of plants. Adding nutritious foods to your diet. Most people, if they go through the work of growing it, will add it to their diet. They will actually eat it. This is especially true of kids. If you can get kids involved in gardening, if they start growing it, then they're going to want to probably eat it more likely. It's good exercise. Gardening is considered moderate exercise, and we all should get out and get some fresh air. So gardening does that. It can be a family-friendly activity. The whole family can be involved in it, choosing what goes in the garden, taking care of the garden, harvesting and eating it. And then some people just like the pride and accomplishment, saying, I grew this tomato, or I grew these green beans. So that's important too. Deciding what to plant. Your personal tastes are probably what should dictate what you plant. So if there's something vegetable, or if there's flowers you like, grow those, because then you'll be more inclined to continue gardening and taking care of them all season. The space you have to grow vegetables or flowers also will determine what kind you can grow. It's kind of hard to grow, let's say, corn in a container on your patio, but there are a lot of other vegetables you can grow. And even things that are real space hogs, like melons and pumpkins and things like that, you probably wouldn't grow those in containers. And even if you have an in-ground garden, but it's not large, what you get for the space you use is not real great. The site conditions of your garden. Do you have full sun, or is it more shady? And you need to choose vegetables or flowers then that can tolerate those conditions. And then you need to decide whether you're going to plant seeds or if you're going to get plants, transplants to plant. Some things to consider. Plants would be used, transplants, when the days to maturity for a vegetable especially is longer than the growing season we have. Here in Wisconsin, or in this part of the state, we have about 110 to 120 days of growing. So if you have an 85-day tomato, let's say, by the time it gets started and you put it out in the garden, or you plant it in the garden, it's going to take a couple of weeks before it gets to even start flowering. And by the time you're going to harvest your tomatoes, there'll probably be little chunks of ice on the vine. So you have to use plants if you're going to grow things like peppers, tomatoes, eggplant, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, and broccoli can be direct seeded. Brussels sprouts especially usually take longer they're usually about 100 days or more. Mm-hmm. So that's when you want to use plants, because you don't have a long enough growing season to put the seeds in the ground and expect it to be mature before the end of the season. Some things you should avoid buying as plants are cucumbers, melons, and squashes. That whole family, they have very delicate roots. And when you transplant them, that disturbs the roots, and they oftentimes don't make it. So they're better off to be seeded right in the ground, and wait till it's warm too. Seeds can be used for all the other plants for garden vegetables, and so you have a wide variety of those. When you're buying seeds, read the description on the package. There's different kinds, for example, of beans. There's pole beans and bush beans, and pole beans get really tall. So if you have a fence or something, or a trellis you can grow them on, that's good. But sometimes you don't want to have a pole bean plant that's going to crawl all over your garden. There's two kinds of tomatoes too. There's determinate tomatoes and indeterminate tomatoes. Determinate tomatoes get about 3 feet high, maybe or so, and they tend to produce most of their tomatoes in a relatively short season. They grow that high, they grow the tomatoes, and the tomatoes all kind of get ripe over a period of maybe 4 or 5 weeks. Indeterminate tomatoes will continue to grow until they freeze. So the vines can get really long. They can get 10 feet long. They have to be staked or put in a cage. And I don't mean just a little cage. It's going to have to be a tall cage. So, things to think about. Read the package, because you might end up with a variety that's going to be not suitable for where you want to plant it. Look at the days to maturity. If you're going to get a late start with your garden, try to choose some vegetables that take less time to reach maturity. How big is the plant going to get when it's fully mature? And a lot of times the package will say, it'll be like 6 feet tall or 4 feet tall, or flowers especially. They come in lots of different sizes. You can get really short flowers and really tall flowers. So it depends on where you want to plant them. What are the special qualities of this variety? Is it good for fresh eating? Is it good for canning? Is it good for freezing? Are flowers good for picking for bouquets? Do they dry well if you want to do dried things? What kind of disease resistance, especially if you've had problems in your garden before? Let's say you have all the time have like downy mildew a lot on your cucumbers and things like that. Then you want to look maybe for a variety of seeds that has resistance to downy mildew. What kind of growing conditions do you have? Do you have a lot of sun? Do you have some shade? Do you have an area that's maybe got 3 or 4 hours of sun during the day, but not full sun? So you might want to choose seeds in according to that. And the sources for seeds, I would avoid the big box stores. The packages tend to be small. They also aren't taken as good care of, in transit and that sort of thing. The best sources for seeds are like garden centers or seed catalogs. And in those places, those are people that this is their living, so they're going to make sure that the seeds are well taken care of. So, and also you have a wider variety, especially if you order from catalogs or online. There's like I said, hundreds of varieties of tomatoes, probably hundreds of varieties of peppers too. If you're buying plants, you go to the garden center and you're going to buy some of these plants. Look for insects or insect damage. Do you see like webbing on the plant? Do you see little bugs on the plant? Is there something flying around the plant? Do the leaves look healthy? Are there any fuzzy looking surfaces, especially on the lower sides of the leaves? That could be a kind of mildew. Do they have blotchy leaves, or do the leaves just look kind of sickly color? So you want to avoid those kinds of plants. And again, if you go to a garden center, they're going to be taking better care of their plants than if you go to somebody who just puts up a display out in their parking lot. And, the person who's there may know something about gardening, but may just be a temporary person who's hired to go out and spray them every day with some water and that sort of thing. So check the root ball too. And there should be lots of white roots. If they're brown or mushy, it means that they're starting to rot. they've been overwatered somewhere along the way. One of the ways to check is if this is your plant stem, put your fingers around your first finger and your middle finger around the stem of the plant and just tip the whole plant upside down, and you can take the pot off and take a check at it's the way you plant them too. If you have plants, and then you have that root ball on top of your hand. So, but that's one of the things you can do too. If you're buying like peppers and tomatoes and eggplants, avoid the ones that already have flowers and little fruits on them. You want the plants not to be flowering and fruiting because you want them to grow a strong root system first, rather before they start producing the fruits. If you get some like that, you can pick off the blossoms or the little fruits. It won't hurt, but it'll give the plant a chance to get established before it starts producing fruit. And use reputable dealers. We talked about that. Garden centers you may pay a little bit more, but you're going to get probably better quality too. Deciding where to plant. Most vegetables need full sun. That's like at least 6 to 8 hours a day, all season. So check where the shadows are going to fall in your garden area. Where the sun height is now in the sky is about the same as it's going to be the end of July. So, if it's in the shade now, it might be in the sun during the middle of the summer, but towards the end of the summer, it'll be back in the shade again. So because of the angle of the sun. And check, do buildings throw shadows on your garden or trees? And check different times of the day too, because it might be sunny in the morning when you go to work, and it might be sunny when you come home, but in between it goes in the shade for some reason. So that's one thing to look at. Do not plant under black walnut trees. Where there was a black walnut tree growing, whether it's live or dead at this point, many vegetables and lots of flowers too don't do well. A black walnut tree gives off a substance called juglone, and it inhibits the growth of many plants. Tomatoes and peppers are particularly susceptible. And so if you have that kind of a plant in your yard, don't take the leaves and stuff and put that in your garden as mulch or anything, because the leaves also have it. If you're just starting a garden, it pays to do a soil test so you know what your soil is. And it should be probably done every 3 years or so. The cost, I think, is $15. You take samples of soil from several different parts of your garden, mix them together in a non-metallic container like enamel or a plastic pail, and then you send about 2 cups or so to the lab. The lab used to be in Marshfield, but now it's in Madison. Although I just learned the other day that they still are picking up samples from the lab out on Yellowstone Drive. So I'm not sure where you leave them out there. I didn't check it out, but somebody told me they still are. And they'll give you back a report that tells you exactly how much of different kinds of plant elements. There's phosphorus, potassium, and nitrogen. And those are the 3 main elements that plants need. And they'll tell you if your garden has enough of those and exactly how much to put on the garden if it's deficient. If you're making a new garden area, check for the slope. It's hard to plant a garden on a slope unless you do some terracing. If you have humps, low areas, that kind of thing, try to level it out because that will just work better for a garden. And consider what was there before. Was it a parking lot before? That's not going to be very good soil then underneath there for a garden. Was it a former building site that somebody just dumped in a bunch of fill? So some of those things might make you think about doing a raised garden so that you can put good garden soil in. And raised beds, some people use them just for the convenience of not having to bend over so far. Raised beds are kind of nice too because they have a perimeter around them so you don't have weeds and grass and stuff growing into your garden. the height of the raised bed, it can be as little as an inch or two, or it can be like a foot. And some people even have them elevated, so they're actually standing. You can stand and garden. So you would have to decide if that's a way you want to go or not. You're almost going to always have to have some kind of fencing or row covers because we have wildlife, even in town. I just discovered that the rabbits ate off the lower 1.5 to 2 feet of all the shrubs on the west side of my house.
Oh.
So, and they've never done that before. But anyway, think about that. Deer will eat just about anything. Rabbits also. And if you're going to be doing any digging to start this garden, call Diggers Hotline, which is 811, at least 3 days before you start to dig. And they'll come out and mark any water lines, gas lines, telephone lines, internet connections. It can be really dangerous if you dig into one of those. You can be electrocuted. You can blow up something. And it's also expensive because if you damage that line coming into your house, you pay for it. So do that first if you're going to be digging. Even if you're digging somewhere around your yard and it's not a very big space, you're just putting something around the, outside of your house, foundation plantings or something. That's where those things usually are. Yes.
I'm sorry, do they still do the soil tests out at the Branch Experiment Farm?
They don't test there anymore, but I just learned the other day that they do still pick up samples there. They have,
Send them someplace.
and they take them to Madison. All the testing is done in Madison now.
So you can still let them off there.
That's what I was told.
Oh, that's good news.
Yeah, because we used to be able to just take it right out here. So for those of you who are listening to this out of this community, we're in Marshfield, Wisconsin, and we're in Zone 4 gardening zone. I don't know, when we get on the internet, we sometimes have people from different states and everything. So just so you know where we're located and what we're talking about. Okay, we're talking now about when to plant. There's cool season vegetables and warm season vegetables. And the ones in the blue here are those that are cool season, and they can take a little bit of cool weather, even an occasional frost. In addition to these, you see here, potatoes too would be a cool season vegetable because they're in the ground for quite a while before they actually start coming up. The warm season vegetables over there, those are the ones that you need to wait until the ground warms up and the temperature warms up in the air. So you would want to wait for the soil temperature to be about 55 to 60 degrees or even better before you plant those plants. And you want to make sure that you're not going to have any frosts anymore either. So that means around here, people always say kind of like Memorial Day, think about planting then. But we've had frosts in the first part of June also yet. So you got to kind of go by what you feel the weather is for the season. Some years it gets warm real early and stays warm, and other years it just doesn't get warm. And I have a feeling this might be one of those years. Cool season crops, those can be as soon as the soil can be worked in the spring. And the test for whether or not the soil is ready to be worked is to squeeze a handful of soil in your hand. And if it holds together when you open your hand, but when you touch it, it crumbles, that means it has the right amount of moisture in it. If it stays in a ball, it's still too wet to work. And if you work it when it's really wet, you're going to end up with clumps, especially in the kind of soil we have around here, which has a lot of clay. And those clumps are going to be there for like the whole season. So wait until it dries out. Getting the soil to dry out and getting it to warm up are the two things that you need to be aware of when you're going to plant. Peas, onions, lettuce, spinach, beets, carrots, turnips, radishes, kohlrabi, parsnips, chard. Those could be planted in late April to early May here. Now this year, I wouldn't guarantee it because they're talking about snow again next week. So, you kind of have to go by your season. Mid-season plants, are still kind of on the cool side, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, they can tolerate a light freeze or frost once they're in the ground. And this would probably be about mid to late May in our part of the state. And then the warm season vegetables are late spring to early summer, and that's the end of May to the first part of June. And those are all the plants that like that warm soil. It really, you can get a soil thermometer. It's a gadget about 6 or 8 inches long, and it's got a little dial on it, a lot like the one you stick in your turkey. And you can stick that in the ground, and it'll tell you the soil temperature. And they're not very expensive, and it takes the guesswork out of, how warm is my soil. So that's also something you might want to think about if you got a birthday coming up or something like that. This is just a planting guide. I believe that is one of the ones that is a handout. So I'm not going to read all of those things, but you can look at that and get some idea of when to plant or when to start seeds. Over in the right-hand column, this is a single planting or succession. Succession means you plant it and the plants grow and they produce, and then you can actually plant another group of that same plant a little bit later, maybe a couple of weeks later, so that you have something for the whole season going on. Did you find it?
Yeah, you have one. It's over there.
Yep, it looks like this.
It's like that. No, I thought I had one, but I don't seem to have it now.
Yes.
Can I ask, sometimes I'm kind of experimenting again this year. Planting potatoes in a bag. It's a black fabric bag.
Yeah.
It's great. I didn't have total success in a bag last year. I'm gonna give it a swing again. But can I plant that as early as I do in the soil?
I would wait maybe a little longer if the air temperature is really cold yet. The question was if you grow something in a bag or the same thing in a pot, the temperature around the plant, okay, is going to determine kind of the temperature that's in the pot. Whereas when it's in the ground, it's the ground temperature, and that stays more even. The pot temperature goes up and down when the sun comes out, it gets warm, and then when the sun goes down, it gets cold. So I might wait a little bit longer on that, especially if you anticipate cold nights. But give it a try. So
An experiment.
yeah.
I experimented a couple years ago planting something real early and then planting something like 2 weeks later. And the one that I planted early, it didn't do as well as the one that I planted when it was warm up. Because I don't know, it didn't get off to a good start.
If the comment for people out in there, planting something too early, a lot of times stunts the plant.
Yes.
And if you plant it like a week or two later, when the conditions are better, it actually grows faster and catches up, and usually outdoes the one that you planted when it was too cool. So
it's warmer and
yeah,
it's out more, or it's lighter or whatever.
Yeah, I remember one spring here we had really, really wet weather, and people didn't get gardens in until like the middle of June, and that's when they first started planting anything. And a lot of those caught up to the gardens, that they usually planted at an earlier time any other year. So the warmer weather, speeds things up a lot. So how to plant. I'm going to do a plug here for something called Square Foot Gardening. If you do a raised bed, this is a really easy one to do. When you have a raised bed, the dimensions should not be more than 4 feet wide, because you want to be able to reach in from both sides. If you get it wider than 4 feet, you can't reach in without stepping in, and that's the idea. You don't want to step into it. But it all started in Nicaragua, where they have really poor soil, and they were trying to figure out how to get the most food to grow in best in the soil. So they took the best soil they had and put it in a raised bed. And then they planted everything really close together. And so there was no space for rows. You didn't walk in it. And when the plants grew, each one had the optimal amount of space it needed to grow to its full size, but not any extra space. And so they figured out they could get more food this way than they could if they planted in rows in a garden, you know. And even if you have like a 1/4 acre garden, if you divide it into rows or what do I want to say, patches that are 4 feet wide, you know, the length of your garden. And then you don't walk in there, so you don't have to till it every year. And you're not compacting the soil by walking on it. And, you know, you just have paths to walk between these strips where your vegetables are growing. A square foot garden can be as small as 2 by 2. So you got 4 squares. A common size is 4 by 8, and somebody's going to do the community gardens. Those are all 4 by 8 plots. The width should be no wider than 4 feet, and the depth for a raised bed depends on the soil quality. If you have really poor soil, you would want the depth of the bed to be probably at least 8 inches. If you have good garden soil and all you want is a kind of a perimeter around your garden, and it doesn't have to be very big, you might not even have to add any soil. You can divide then the bed. You can use old blind slats, wooden strips, use string, you know, to like a nail and string the bed that way. I don't even bother with that. I just use some shovel handles and kind of line them up and, you know, plant in the squares. You can think of other things you might use too, but if you're a beginner, you might want to have something more permanent. There's a basic planting pattern for the square foot garden. And for example, 1 square foot will grow 16 carrots, radishes, leaf lettuce. And you can actually make yourself a template. Let's take a piece of cardboard or plastic and, you know, make 16 evenly spaced holes in it. And then you put that in your square and you stick your finger in there, and that's where you put your seeds. It saves a lot of seeds because you put 1 or 2 seeds in each hole, and then you don't have to thin later, like a whole row of plants where you've got, you know, like 5 or 6 growing so close together you can hardly see. Then if you have plants that require a little bit more space, like beets, onions, kohlrabi, or peas, you would grow 9 in a square. And when the plants grow up, then they fill that square. The leaves shade the ground, so you have less weeds to grow. The shaded ground makes it for less watering also because the sun doesn't beat on the soil. Green beans, head lettuce, spinach, and okra would be 4 to a square. And then when you get to the big plants like tomatoes, peppers, cabbage, broccoli, it's 1 plant per square. And this is what it kind of looks like after it starts growing. So you can see people here, there's rows of lettuce, and then there's some squares with onions in them and carrots, and looks like some cucumbers along the bottom. And they also have, if you're going to have something like taller tomatoes or pole beans or whatever, you can go up then from the garden. When you're planting your garden, crops should be rotated. So you don't want to plant your tomatoes in the same place every year and your beans in the same place every year. Because if there's diseases or insects that bother that one year, they like to sometimes stay in the soil wherever that plant was. And then the next year, they're right there ready to attack your plant the second year. So they should be rotated. We try to rotate so that you don't plant the same plant in the same place only once every 3 or 4 years. If you have a small garden, it's not possible to do that sometimes. But if you have the opportunity, try to rotate. Let's see. And there's different plant families, and sometimes the whole family of plants tend to have the same common problems. So these are the different plant families. So you want to have plants from different plant family when you rotate. So broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, they're all in the mustard family. So you would want to plant something else in there like beets or Swiss chard or carrots or something the following year so that you don't have the same plant family in that same spot every year. And that's where it comes into a garden plan every year. I have a plan, I divide my garden into different spaces. And then each year I write down in each space what I grew there. And then I can look back the last 2 or 3 years, what was growing in that spot 2 or 3 years ago. And I can also make notes on that page then, like this kind of plant, this variety didn't do well, or this one was great, or, this one got sick and died on me right away. So it's a handy way to do that too. You want to consider that if you're going to do the square foot gardening thing, and even if you're doing a regular garden to save space, vine crops can be staked or trellised or caged, grown on a fence to prevent them from sprawling all over the place. Taller plants should be on the north side of a garden that's in full sun because they're going to be tall enough that they might shade something that's shorter. Unless you purposely want to shade it. Sometimes people want to plant things like lettuce in an area that's kind of partially shaded because the lettuce won't bolt and get bitter as soon if it's in the shade a little bit. If you're going to plant a vegetable garden, add some flowers in there too. The flowers attract the pollinators, and once they come to the flowers, then they're also going to pollinate your vegetables. Let's see, and mix up the varieties, different species in different adjacent squares. There's a theory called companion planting, and it was largely kind of hearsay until a couple of years ago. There's a book out by Jessica Walliser. It's on your list of references, and she's collected research where people have grown plants together, those that definitely have an effect on one plant and some that don't have an effect on the plant. And I think the library has that book here on the shelf. So if you want to check that out, her theory is there are a couple of reasons why you want to plant some plants together. Plants that attract a specific insect to it can be like radishes. My radishes always have lots of holes in the leaves, and that's flea beetles, and they're out early in the season. So if you want to keep them from growing on some other crop, you plant some radishes there, and they'll go to the radishes first because they like those the best. So there's different plants that act as trap crops for different kinds of insects. That might be one reason to plant something near something else. Peas and beans are good near almost any crop because they fix nitrogen. They have little nodules on the roots that actually can take nitrogen from the air and fix it in the soil. And then other plants can use that. Some plants don't smell good or they're strongly scented. And marigolds, we found that, kind of are one of those plants that kind of make things go away. The onion family too can also sometimes be used to keep certain insects off of foods, but that it's kind of specific. So if you want to really look into that, check out that book and take a look and see. This is an example of a garden map. I have a 4 by 8 foot garden. I gotta get my mouse out here. I think my mouse is going to work. Where is it? There it is. Okay, up here you can see if you're going to plant a big plant like tomatoes, 1 per square, they sometimes actually take up more than one space. And I wouldn't plant like 4 tomatoes in a row 1 foot apart from each other. That's way too close together. But you can do things like, this is kind of like not really succession planting, interplanting it's called. So you plant some lettuce in some of the spaces or spinach in some of the spaces between these plants. Lettuce and spinach are going to be done growing by the time your tomato plants start to get really big. And so then that tomato has room to grow into that space. Some other things here, like you can mix up broccoli and then you have carrots, beets, maybe some more carrots and another broccoli. This is how you would do the square foot gardening. You want to mix things up. So if you have an animal pest and it gets to one square, it's got to really hunt to get to another square to find the same kind of vegetable. If you had 3 in a row, it would just go from one to the other. Here's a succession planting thing. You put peas on a fence here. And then when they're done, you pull them out and then you can plant lettuce or maybe some bush beans in that same spot. Another thing, interplanting example down here is with carrots. Carrots take a long time to germinate. So you can interplant them with radishes. Your radish crop will be up and gone by the time the carrots get to any size at all. So you actually planting 2 crops in one square then. And down here, let's see. The example down here is to plant some marigolds in between. Some other good flowers to plant are cosmos, zinnias. These are all plants that a lot of insects that eat other insects like. So you're drawing them in to eat other or attack other insects. I'm going to do a whole program on good bugs and bad bugs in the next month or 2, and how to get the good bugs to come to your garden and to keep the bad bugs under control. Succession crops, in addition to growing like the same crop planted like 2 weeks apart and then another 2 weeks and another 2 weeks, you can also plant short crop plants like peas and then put in carrots later, because carrots can keep going into the fall. Broccoli, and maybe that plant is done and then you plant some salad greens in the fall. So, you know, you can kind of keep something growing always in your garden, and then you don't have to worry about weeding that part of the garden either. So, and we talked about some of these intercropping things in just a minute ago. Here's again that square foot garden, and here's people have used trellises to get things to grow up. If you're going to use this, look for varieties that have short vines. They do have plants now like cucumbers, you know, where the vines only get like 3 feet long instead of like 6 or 8 feet. They're even starting to get some shorter vine squashes and pumpkins, you know, so look for those. They're out there. Okay. Hardening. Yeah, usually they are, because they've been bred so that they have shorter distances between sets of leaves, which makes the whole vine shorter.
Right.
Yeah. If you're into heirlooms, you know, you got mostly the standard things, but some people like heirlooms plants too. So it's all what you plant, all what you like to plant, you know, what you prefer.
I'm all by myself. I live by myself, and so I plant things in sections. Like I'll plant maybe some carrots here and some radishes, and then maybe about 3-4 weeks later I'll plant some more. And so
Sure.
they, you know, they're not all
Succession planting.
That's a good
Yep.
idea, yeah.
So you have something going, you have something all summer.
Right.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Okay. If you get plants, if you grow your own plants, you have to harden them off. If you've ever started seeds on your own. Also, you may have to harden off something that comes from a garden center too. If you buy the plant and it's inside a greenhouse, I would ask if it's been hardened off or not. And what hardening off is, when the plant grows inside, it has really kind of thin leaves. The cuticle, or the skin of the leaf, is quite thin. And if you just take that plant outside and you expose it to the strong sun and the wind and everything, it's going to dry out. Just like if you have thin skin on your hand, it gets all dried out if you expose it to lots of sun and wind. So hardening off is a process that you do to get the plant used to being outside. So the first day you take it out and you might set it in the shade and out of the wind, you know, and it might stay out there for a couple hours. And then maybe the next day you put it out for some more hours. And then you gradually move it to a space that's got more sun, over a couple days and more wind. And after about a week to 10 days, that plant has grown, some extra layers on its leaves. So when you put it out in your garden, it's going to be tough enough to stand up to what's out there. Let's see. Yeah, about 7 to 10 days, it should be ready to go in the garden. If you have your choice, a cloudy, calm day or planting in the late afternoon is easiest on the plants because they're not out there right in the full sun the first day when you're planting them. When you get your garden ready, smooth the soil, take out all the weeds to begin with. Otherwise, you're going to be working with weeds all year. Dig a hole that's wider than the pot and is about as deep as the pot. You want to plant the plant at the same depth that it was in the pot. So you don't want to plant it too deep, with the exception of tomatoes. They can be planted down deep. And if they're really long and lanky, you can actually put them in the soil and kind of lay them sideways, very gently, bending the stem a little bit. And it might kind of look slanted for a little while, but it will right itself in a few days. And the reason for that is tomatoes will grow new roots all along that stem. So you'll have a lot more roots for the tomato plant. I talked about loosening the plant, put the plant stem between your first 2 fingers and tip the whole pot over and pull the pot off, and then you can put the plant in the ground. If the roots are going like round and round and round in the pot, you want to loosen those roots and spread them out a little bit. Otherwise, they'll keep going round and round, and they won't spread out, and your plant will be like pot bound all summer, even though it's in the garden. Let's see, water the plant well, let that water sink in, put some more, dirt in, pack it around the plant, water it some more. You want to make sure it's got a lot of water at first. And if you want to, you can make like a kind of a shallow dish around the plant. So when you water it, when it's first small, the water stays right by the plant. Label the plant, because especially if you're growing more than one kind of pepper or tomato or whatever, you want to know what it is you're growing in there. Your question?
Yeah, well, I wanted to share with you, my uncle lived to be 102, and he lived in Neilsville, and he had always the most fantastic garden. And he always started his tomato plants by the moon in the month of March. And I don't remember if it was a full moon or whatever, but I would go over there on Sundays to visit him and his wife, and we always had fresh tomatoes on 4th of July, and that was his goal. But he would take milk containers, like quart of milk containers like that, and he'd plant them in there, and then he'd go out in the garden and he'd slit the 4 sides, he'd dig the hole, and then he'd slit the 4 sides, and then he'd like put that right in there and slide that out like that. He said not to disturb the roots.
Yeah. Now we have peat pots, which are kind of the same thing. The roots will go right through the pot, so you don't have to disturb the roots that much. But yeah, and add any supports too. Like if you're going to be staking a plant or whatever, add that right when you plant the plant so that you don't break off roots putting that in later. If you're planting seeds, again, rake the soil surface smooth and take out all the weeds. If you're using the square foot gardening thing, you make your little indentations, sow your seeds. Plant 1 to 3 seeds at the depth indicated on the package. Many people, first-time gardeners, make mistakes of planting seeds too deep, and they don't have enough energy to reach the light before they run out of steam. And so especially carrots, those real tiny seeds, carrots and lettuce, don't cover those with very much soil. In fact, I've even had lettuce that says don't cover at all. And some of the bigger seeds like peas and beans, you can plant like 1 inch deep and they'll still come up. But the very tiny seeds, don't plant them too deep. Make sure that you firm the soil over the plants, water them well so there makes good soil contact. And then label the row or the square or whatever so you know what's in it. After the little seedlings come up, if you have more than one growing in one spot, cut off the extra ones. If you pull them out, you're likely to pull out the one that's there too, or at least you'll disturb the root system of the one that you're leaving. So cut them off. Saving seeds. Many times you'll get a package of seeds and there's going to be way more seeds in there than you're going to use. You maybe don't need 50 tomato plants the first year you grow them. You can save seeds for quite a while. Other things you can do, share with other people. If you know other people who are gardening, get together and say, okay, what kind of beans or what kind of peppers or what kind of broccoli do you want to plant? And, we'll share some seeds. You can also save them, keep them in the original package so you know what kind of seed they are, and all the directions and stuff for planting. Place it in a tightly sealing container, like a jar that with a screw on top that screws on really tight. Add a sachet of dry milk powder. I just take a piece of paper toweling, put a couple tablespoons of dry milk powder in it, pull the sides up and put a rubber band on it. That acts as a desiccant to keep, it absorbs moisture and it keeps the seeds dry. And so put that in with the seeds in the jar and then keep it tightly covered and keep it in a cool place, the coolest place you have. If it's your basement, maybe if you have room in your refrigerator, but even basement temperature is okay.
How about light? It doesn't need light, of course.
I would keep it in the dark too. Yeah. And most seeds, I planted some seeds that were from 2018, just a little while ago, and they still come up. The only ones that are real short-lived are onions and corn. They generally don't go more than onions, not just 1 year. The next year you probably won't get very good results. Corn, maybe 2 years. And pelleted seeds. Those are seeds that you can buy, the real tiny seeds, and they have a coating on them, so they're easier to handle. Those also don't keep as long as the plain bare seeds. If you're unsure if your seeds are good the following year, you can do a germination test. Take 10 seeds, put them in a wet paper towel, put it in a plastic bag, and set it in a warm space and see how many of them sprout. If you have like anywhere from maybe 5 seeds or more, you just know that you might have to plant them a little thicker if only 5 sprout. If 9 out of the 10, they're good to go. I mean, you can plant them like normal. If you get less than 4 seeds as they're sprouting, I'd probably buy a new package of seeds. But they keep a long time. I've kept some, like I say, 5-6 years, and they still grow.
What about some of the Amish or the other people that use so much manure in the garden? What do you say about that?
Manure you can use, but it has to be aged. If you put it on fresh, it'll burn plants. It's too strong. So you want to have it sit for at least a year. If you got a place where you've piled manure and it's been there for like a year or whatever, that would probably be good to go. Or you need to put it on like in the fall and then, let it sit there over the winter and then till that in.
I had an experience. I bought some flowers and also some plants, and they just did not seem to be doing well. So I took them out of the container, and this much of the container had tiny, tiny little bugs on it, and it was from the manure. And I actually took it out to the Branch Experiment Farm, and he said that they were eating on the roots of my plants.
Mm-hmm.
So if I buy things like that now, I take them out of the pot and
take a look.
I actually take them out of the pot and I put them in my own pot because I see the hangers or whatever, because I don't want that to happen.
Yeah.
It was really devastating. It really.
The other thing with manure is you oftentimes, depending on what animal it's from, you oftentimes get a lot of weed seeds with it too. So if it's composted or aged for a while, then it's good. Like I say, the fresh manure is a little bit too strong for most plants.
So if the manure sits for about a year, it should be able to, what I planted to do is go out to some friends of mine that has a dairy. And some of the manure has septic for lots they've sold their cows. And they don't have a dairy, they had a dairy. So that would be okay to be putting in my raised gardens this year? Or should
I would say, yeah, don't go overboard till you see how strong it is.
Okay.
And but if it's dried and it's, you know, been sitting for a while, it's probably good to go.
I'll ask the guys, you know.
Yeah.
They're two old bachelor guys that have this family farm. So I'll ask the guys how long it's been sitting there.
Hmm.
I was gonna go take my buckets out.
Yeah.
With my roof art plants, I dig a trench around the outside, maybe this far from, you know, the roots, and I dig a trench maybe about this deep. And then I just put manure around that. And boy, I have the best roof art. And-
Yeah.
But it, you know,
Because you're not getting it too close to the plant.
yeah, exactly, to damage the whatever, but it just, you know, I just keep it back and then I mix up the, you know, then I'll go out and I'll mix up the dirt a little
Yeah.
bit so that a little bit gets closer to the plant and stuff,
Sure.
and it works real well.
Good. Okay. After you've planted your garden, you want to do watering at the soil level. Don't take your sprinkling can and pour it over the top of the plant. That keeps the leaves wet too long, and a lot of diseases like wet leaves. That's a good way to start them. So you're also wasting a lot of water because the water, you know, evaporates off the leaves and stuff and never gets to the ground, to the roots where the plants need it. So water at the base of the plant.
Because should you pour it on like a sprinkling can or just
A sprinkling can at the base. Yeah, you might have to, you know, pour some on, wait for it to soak in, then pour some more on. Yeah. Anytime you're spraying it up in the air, you're getting a lot that's lost to evaporation too. So if you want to save water, if you're paying your water bill, you want to conserve water also. Seeds need, that area where it's seeded need to be kept pretty much moist, that the soil looks wet until the seeds start to germinate, because some of them are only, you know, like that far down in the ground. So once they're about 2 inches tall, though, you can kind of back off on the watering and, you know, let the top of the ground get dry before you water again, and put your finger in there and see how far down is it dry. You know, if it's dry at least an inch, then you probably need to water some more. If you go down 2 inches, yeah, you probably should water now. But plants grow deeper roots if you don't keep watering them a little bit every day. So water maybe twice a week, but a little bit more at each time, because then the water sinks down and the plants grow roots out, so that if you get to a point where you can't water for a few days or whatever, your plants won't all die on you.
is it better to water if it's a water plant maybe every other day than overwatered every day?
You can actually water a plant too much. If the roots stay wet too long, they'll actually start rotting. And the plant looks like it needs water because it's kind of wilting. And you add some more water and it doesn't do any good. So yeah, you can drown a plant. So it's better to, you know, water twice a week or 3 times a week. You kind of have to go with the weather too. I mean, if it rains, then you don't have to water at all. So go out there and, like I say, stick your finger in the soil, see how far down it's dry. Weeds, you need to keep on top of them, especially you don't want to let them flower and go to seed, because 7 years seeding makes for, or, you know, 1 year's seeding makes for 7 years weeding, something like that, is the old saying. So pull them out. I mean, you don't have to get them when they're real tiny, but get them before they set seed. If you can, use some mulch to conserve water, whether it's flower beds or vegetable beds. And organic mulch is best. That's shredded leaves, bark, coconut hulls. Don't use that if you have a pet, though, especially a dog. So you want those organic kind of things. Stones do not make good mulch. They collect the heat and they cook your plants. And a lot of people put landscape fabric underneath them, which is even worse, because the landscape fabric a lot of times actually chokes off the plant. I saw some very bad examples of that, where the plant is actually so restricted. It's got roots down here, it's got some stuff on top, but it's like restricted by the fabric. And then also the sones on top of the fabric, you get plant debris in there no matter how well you care for it. And pretty soon you've got a layer of soil above that fabric, that landscape fabric, and stuff starts growing in there. And then you got weeds coming out of the stones. So it's just not good. Plus, it's non-biodegradable, most of it too. Straw is good. Straw is good. Yep. You want to get as clean straw as you can. Yeah. I forgot that one. That's a good one. That's the one I use all the time. And the other thing is, if your plants start to show some kind of disease, prune that off and get rid of it, and hopefully keep it from spreading.
Like the stem, you would cut, if you say you saw this leaf that looks like it had a disease, would you cut it down by the
I would just remove the leaf.
Oh, just the leaf?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And if the whole plant really becomes diseased, you might want to get rid of it because it may spread to other plants in your garden and somebody else's garden. Don't put diseased plants in your compost pile unless you're sure that you're going to get a really hot compost pile, and most backyard compost piles don't get that hot. So, whoa, my slide is really weird there. If you're going to be growing in containers, choose an appropriate size container for the plant. The bigger the plant, the bigger the container it has to be. If you're growing a tomato, a 5-gallon container is probably the smallest you want to go. Even like a half barrel would be better. And flowers too, depending on the kind of flower you're growing. Flowers, we tend to jam more in a pot and just fertilize the heck out of it. As we do container gardening, but vegetables, you can't do that as much. Fertilizing. I don't know if I skipped over that somewhere. Be a little bit stingy with the fertilizer at first. And once the tomato plants or the pepper plants have peppers and tomatoes starting growing on them, then you can start fertilizing some. If you fertilize too early, the plant puts out a whole lot of leaves. The plant looks great. It's a big bushy plant, but you're not going to get a lot of fruit.
What type of fertilizer do you recommend?
Basically any kind. It depends kind of what you're growing. Like there's fertilizers, there's 3 numbers on any balanced fertilizer is pretty good. If you're growing something that you want flowers or fruit, you want the middle number to be bigger than the other 2 numbers. And those are usually like if you buy like Bloom Buster or whatever for flowers.
The middle number is higher.
The middle number is higher for something that you want to have fruits or flowers, lots of fruits or flowers on it. So, but don't get out there and like fertilize a whole bunch of it right away, especially those peppers and tomato plants, because you'll get a nice big looking healthy plant, but you won't get very many fruits on it. Use potting mix in containers, not garden soil. Garden soil gets packed in there and gets real heavy. And make sure the container has drainage holes in the bottom. And if you have one that doesn't, it's a pretty planter, but it doesn't have holes in the bottom, then I would put something like stones or something in the bottom, set another pot inside that pretty planter. And then if it gets a lot of rain or you water too much, you can dump the water out and the pot isn't sitting in it. But
what kind of potting soil do you recommend then? 10
just potting soil.
Just plain potting soil.
Yeah.
Is peat okay to have a combination, to have it combined in the potting soil?
Actually, potting soil is peat, vermiculite, and perlite, most cases. I mean, you can make your own potting soil if you want to buy those 3 ingredients and mix them together, but it's just as easy to buy a bag of potting mix. So anything that's potting soil. Containers are going to need to be watered more often because the plants have a limited space to grow out roots. They're depending on you for the water. And, to some extent for fertilizer. If the plants look like they're not doing well, you may have to add a little fertilizer. There's lots of different varieties, vegetable varieties for containers. This is one of your resources on that page. These are like smaller size plants. Like I'm thinking of patio tomato plants, that you can grow a little bit, a smaller plant. So you could actually, set it on your patio outside, your patio table. It's in one of your lists of resources. Or if you're buying seeds, look for things that say compact, patio, short vine, perfect for containers, bush, determinate. Those are some words that are used to describe those plants that don't get as big as some of the other regular standard size plants. And then there's another resource there for selecting and planting containers. All of these are on that reference sheet. Okay, I just hadn't gotten this far. Fertilizing, don't go overboard. We said at first, when you're weeding, remove the whole weed. Another reason for weeding is weeds can attract bad insects too. And so you're bringing those in and they're feeding on those weeds, and then they're transferring diseases to your garden. And they're competing for the water and the nutrients and everything else with your plants. We said remove diseased plants, do not compost them. Insects, hand pick them off if you can. Avoid chemicals unless the infestation becomes really severe. And use chemicals only after properly diagnosing what insect you have, because there are certain chemicals that are used on certain insects. And if you spray with the wrong chemical, you're likely to kill the good insects and miss the bad one that you wanted to get in the first place. So it's called integrated pest management. And it's a theory where you do the least that you use the least chemicals that you have. You try all kinds of other things like diseases, planting plants the right distance apart so there's good airflow so you don't get diseases, weeding and that sort of thing to keep insects away, doing that interplanting thing, that plant partner thing to bring in good insects and try and control the bad insects.
I went out to the landfill a couple of years ago and I got some dirt out there, and there was some insects in that dirt, so I didn't go out there and get any more. And anyway, it affected my plant. I had thrown out.
Yeah. The other thing that I didn't have in this talk, that made me think of it, jumping worms. You guys know about jumping worms? Okay. Plant sharing is one of the ways that they're spread from one person to another. So your friend gives you a plant, they have jumping worms. Now you have jumping worms. Also, be very careful about where you buy your mulch and your compost, and ask the person who's selling it, what have they done to control jumping worms? And if they go, I wouldn't buy there. Because if compost, for example, is really heated up, to the temperature it's supposed to be, it'll destroy the jumping worm eggs and the worms too. But otherwise, you're running the risk of, when you go and pick up stuff like at a community compost thing, you want to check and make sure to see how heated it's been. Compost in big piles heats up and gets to be like 190 degrees in the middle. And you keep turning that always and stuff. That's the process they use to heat it up. But you want to make sure that it's been processed the right way. So we talked about mulching. It conserves the soil moisture, cools the soil, prevents weeds, add nutrients to the soil. I would wait till, especially for those warm season vegetables, wait till the soil has warmed up a little bit before you mulch. So if it's a little cool when you first put them in, let the soil warm up a little bit. shredded leaves, straw, shredded newspaper, paper mulch, cocoa hulls, untreated grass clippings. If you catch them in your lawn, not if you treat the lawn though, don't put them on there, and put them on in a thin layer, because otherwise they will kind of coalesce and get kind of mushy and yucky. And those are examples of organic things. Avoid plastic mulch and stones and that kind of thing. So when you're harvesting, especially vegetables, learn what the characteristics are when the fruit is ripe. For example, like melons, like musk melons and that, if they come off the vine really easily, if you just touch it with your finger and it comes off, that's a ripe melon. Okay. Watermelons, you turn them over and you look and make sure that bottom side is like a light, creamy color, those kind of things. When you harvest your tomatoes, is it an orange tomato, a pink tomato, a red tomato? You can wait for an orange tomato to get red forever and ever, and it's not going to ever get red. So learn what kind of what the characteristics are of the fruit or the produce when it's ripe, and keep harvesting, because most plants, their whole thing in their whole life is to reproduce themselves. Okay, so if you keep picking off the fruit, it's saying, darn it, they did it again. I got to try again. So it keeps producing more fruit. So keep harvesting and you'll be getting more vegetables or whatever. Don't let stuff rot in the garden. That draws in insects, and if it's rotting because it's diseased, that keeps the disease all in your soil for the next year. Take out plants that aren't producing anymore and put them in your compost pile. Plant something else in that spot so it keeps continuing to produce the whole year. And other things to think about when you're gardening: wear UPF clothing. So in other words, something that the sun is not going to be shining through. I think a t-shirt, a white t-shirt, is about a UPF of 7, and you want to have at least 30, to protect your skin from the sun. A hat, sturdy shoes, wear gloves to protect your hands. Use good ergonomic tools that fit your hand and are easy to work with. Good body mechanics, safe bending, lifting, that sort of thing. Warm up before you start some heavy duty tasks. Drink plenty of water. Wear protective clothing whenever you're using chemicals of any kind. That includes like long pants and boots and gloves and goggles. And always follow label directions on any kinds of products you use in your garden. They're on there for a reason. It's the law. So you have to follow them. If you have no recourse if you don't follow the directions. So, and most of them have like a warning. If you're spraying something, check to see, is it going to kill all the good bugs too? Or is it just going to kill the bad bugs? And unfortunately, most insecticides kill the good bugs too. So when you are searching for information on the internet, and the way I find most of the information for the talks I give is by this method. Like say you want to find something on growing peppers. So you put in your search engine, growing peppers, and then you put after it the word extension or site:.edu. And that will bring up sites that are from universities, colleges where they've done research on different things. You won't get the peoples out there who are blogging and, the commercial sites that want to sell you something. So that's what you need to do in order to find accurate information. And then those will come to the top of the results list, when you go down the list. Choose information from Wisconsin or a state that's close by to Wisconsin. Minnesota has a lot of great gardening resources. Cornell is in New York, but it has a similar climate to ours. Michigan, Illinois, Iowa, Indiana, those are kind of states that are close to us. And avoid those blogs and commercial sites because you have no idea what the experience is of that person on there. We did this in a training class and we said, should I paint a tree when you cut off a branch of a tree? And if you just put that in, we got all kinds of sites for tree paint and, all kinds of stuff. The answer is no, you shouldn't do anything to it. So, you need to put in that extra extension or site edu on it. I want to bring your attention, the Master Gardeners has a spring plant sale, May 20th. It's in conjunction with the Port Edwards garage sale. They have a citywide garage sale, and it's at 930 Westport Drive in Port Edwards. We will have vegetable and annual started plants, perennial succulents, bulbs, houseplants. There'll be the Ask a Master Gardener booth down there too. So if you have gardening questions, you can bring those. So I'll leave that up there for a minute in case anybody. Yep.
Now way in the other corner.
And for those of you watching this later or a year later, check because it'll probably be around that same time next year too. Just happens that this is a Saturday.
Just like the one at the park is always in conjunction with.
Yes, the fall ones. Yep.
Where was Port Edwards? I haven't lived here very long.
Port Edwards,
Where is that?
kind of south of Wisconsin Rapids or west of
Oh.
Wisconsin Rapids. It's down in the Rapids area.
Oh, okay, I think it's 73 or something, I'm not sure, but. one of
Yeah.
those highways.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I could look it up now. I know generally where it is.
Yeah. So any questions?
Very good. Very good. Yeah, thank you. That's very comprehensive.
Okay. I'm done. So you're.
Well, thank you, Donna.
Thank you.
That's good information.
It wasn't too technical, it was very basic.
Yeah. She does an amazing job.
Well, I try to gear it so that somebody who doesn't know too much about gardening can understand it. So.
When will the next event be here at the